Hello and welcome everybody to another series of Planted Unearthed talks in partnership with the National Trust at magnificent, if a little wet, Stourhead. My name's Sam Peters and I'm one of the co-founders of Planted. In our latest series of talks titled Cool Design Sustainable Futures, we've been exploring how we design places, spaces and systems to mitigate against the twin threats of human-induced climate breakdown and biodiversity decline. Last summer, for the first time on record, the UK recorded temperatures in excess of 40 degrees centigrade, while on current projections, and according to the latest UN report published last month, the world is almost certain to experience more unwanted records in the next 5 years, with temperatures set to rise by more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. As we enter uncharted territory, the threats posed to human civilization, ecosystems, economies and global infrastructure are just beginning to be understood. With water systems now under intense stress across the globe, millions face the threat of running out of water, although it's hard to believe as we sit here now, with southern Europe now seeing weather patterns previously associated with North Africa and the UK experiencing longer dry spells of dry, hot weather with shorter but far more intense periods of rainfall. Meanwhile, our rivers and shorelines are under intense stress and threat from pollution from agricultural runoff and sewage overflow, making many of the UK's waterways devoid of life and toxic. So how big is the problem and what can be done to fix it? Where should we be looking for examples of best water management practice, and how do we hold water companies responsible for malpractice while also taking personal responsibility in response to this clear and present threat? And I'm delighted to welcome 4 experts onto the panel with a huge depth of experience in this field for this Muddying the Waters talk. First, to my left, Tim Smedley, an award-winning sustainability writer who has written for The Guardian, Financial Times and BBC, and whose latest book, The Last Drop, Solving the World's Water Crisis, will be published this week and is currently on my bookshelf. To Tim's left, Brontie Ansell from Lawyers for Nature. Brontie is a senior lecturer in law at the University of Essex, who specialises in clinical legal education, land and property law and wild law. Brontie is the co-founder of Lawyers for Nature, where she is also head of research. To Brontie's left, Tim Measham from Wildfish. Nick Measham, my apologies. Nick leads the Wildfish team. He feels strongly that evidence is key to influencing governments and the regulatory bodies responsible for protecting wild fish, and is currently taking the government to court for their failure to take action against water companies polluting our rivers. And last but by no means least, Ewan Jones on the far side. Ewan is the co-founder of community river charity Brue Crew, working to restore the natural balance of the River Brue as a haven for wildlife. He is a passionate advocate for wildlife and nature, and until Tuesday was the mayor of Bruton. Ewan is also a trustee of the Forest of Selwood Group, and you're all very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, the 4 panellists. So I'd like to just start off by asking you to introduce yourselves, say a little bit about your experience with rivers and water and river systems. And Tim, perhaps if I could start with you, you're there holding your book, The Last Drop. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and more about your experience in this field?
Yeah, sure. I'm clutching my copy of the book because it's the only copy I have. It's not out until Thursday. So at the moment, this is the only one. Although I believe they're on sale. We have an advanced box of books that have arrived. So they'll
be in the Fold bookshop afterwards.
But yeah, Sam said a phrase just now of how big is the problem and what do we need to do to fix it. That's essentially what I've spent the last 3 years trying to answer with this book. It's an international book, but there's also a long chapter on England's water crisis. And interestingly, it was probably one of the most interesting case studies that I found internationally was the England water story. But yes, it's fitting that we're here in the rain today. I live in Oxfordshire. It hasn't rained for 3 weeks. Both my water butts are dry. We're desperate for the rain. And finally it's arrived, and we probably will get harder than this. I'm hoping it will hold off and not be torrential during the talk. But internationally, we're seeing the same changing weather patterns, longer dry periods followed by more intense rainfall. So drought followed by flood. According to the UN, there's 29% more droughts since the year 2000 and 134% more floods. That's because when the rain is falling, it's falling harder and it's hitting drier, parched earth, therefore flooding off to the side and causing floods, as opposed to being able to seep down to the groundwater. So some of that is a climate story. The climate is changing, the weather patterns are changing. But also there's a human mismanagement story about what we're doing to capture that rainfall. So in some countries, such as the UK and also Belgium, we've been very well drained for decades, if not centuries. We've spent a century trying to drain our lands, channel the water out into the rivers, out to sea, get rid of it almost. We need to be doing the opposite now. So we need to be capturing the rain where it falls through changed farming practices, through rainwater capture, through rewilding of rivers. And we're going to really have to start doing that in England. And my colleagues on the panel will get into the detail more. But just to give an overview, in England, southern England at least, the rainfall is about 600 millimetres a year on average. That's really low. Internationally, that's low. So it's about the same as Kenya, it's about the same as Lebanon. It's less than all Australian major cities. We are a water scarce region in southern England, but no one knows it or acts like it. And we're going to have to start, because drier summers are going to be the new norm. So 50% drier summers by 2050.
Thanks, Tim. And we'll be definitely getting on to sort of individual acts that we can all do to make a difference later on in the talk. So thanks very much, Tim. Brontie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out in the pouring rain. So I'm Brontie, and I am a director of Lawyers for Nature. So we are a legal collective of, we like to call ourselves a ragtag bunch of barristers and solicitors who only represent the natural world. So all of the work we do, cases, transactional work, policy work, is for and on behalf of the natural world. And I'm also an academic at Essex, but that's not quite as relevant today. So with Lawyers for Nature, part of our work, we've got two key strands of work that we're doing at the moment. The first thing we're doing is trying to move the discussion around rights of nature forward in the UK. And a rights of nature approach in the UK would look like giving specific aspects of nature, such as a river, legal rights that would be enforceable in court. And that's really important when the state is potentially not protecting the rivers. So if the river has its own rights, a bit like a company has rights, a bit like a human has rights, then it can take perpetrators to court and it can seek reparations in the form of damages, which can then be used to specifically repair that river. And so that's one of the pieces of work we're doing. And we're also doing another strand of work with corporations to use the corporate sphere to also recognise rights of nature. So last September, I was responsible for appointing nature to the board of the shampoo company Faith in Nature, who's been going 50 years, and they decided that they actually wanted a voice for nature on their board of directors. And they changed their articles of association for their company to show that they wanted to be a purpose-driven company that respected nature and gave nature a voice and, in fact, a vote on their board of directors. So that's the two kind of strands of work that we're currently doing at Lawyers for Nature.
Thanks, Brontie. Nick Measham from Wildfish, I suspect giving nature rights will appeal to you, but could you explore or just explain the work that you guys are doing, please?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. I'm the CEO of Wildfish. We used to be known as Salmon and Trout Conservation, but I changed the name because our fish need a much wider voice than they were getting from their traditional angling-focused community. So I'm trying to give us a much greater voice. The fish urgently need it. And all our work is focused around what fish require. So basically two things: clean water and lots of it. And also, they also need free passage, the ability to move up and down rivers and migrate from rivers to the sea, in the case of salmon and sea trout. So all of our work focuses around that. We're evidence-led, which means that though we're a campaigning charity, we get other people to collect the evidence, and we use that evidence to do what we can to protect wildfish and their habitats. At the moment, one of the biggest problems we face is that it may come as a surprise to you, and it causes a lot of people to be surprised. We actually have, and have had for some considerable time, pretty much all the rules and regulations that the government needs to protect the environment and to protect our rivers There's one fundamental problem, and that is that they don't do anything about it, or very, very little about it. And in one area in particular that's been made popular, but it's not just about sewage. You'll hear from others that slurry and agriculture is as big an issue. But in the case of sewage, the government has failed to enforce regulations that have been on the statute book since 1994, at least, if not earlier, which require water companies to treat sewage and not dump it in rivers. But unless you have exceptional rainfall, and today this is not and would not count as exceptional rainfall. But what's been happening is that partly to keep bills low, the government has not forced water companies to make the investments they need to make in the sewage capacity. And the result is that on a daily basis, our sewage companies are spilling raw sewage into our rivers and treating it as a sewer and not treating it in sewage works. That we think is unacceptable. The government belatedly, thanks to various campaigners, Surfers Against Sewage, Fergal Sharkey, ourselves and others, have started to pay attention, but they've basically come up with a cover-up. They've come up with a thing called the Storm Overflows Discharge Reduction Plan, which is designed to allow, over a gradual period of time, the water companies to make the investments needed to stop the poo at getting into rivers. That's just not good enough. We've already got the legislation, as I've said. So we are next month, the 4th of July, we're taking the government to court. We're in the High Court, and we are demanding that they enforce the existing legislation and that they get rid of this ridiculous plan, which is simply designed to cover up and extend the period of time by which water companies can continue to dump raw sewage in our rivers. So that's the sort of things we get up to. We do also lots of other things as well, but I'm going to hand over to
Ewan.
Ewan.
Thanks very much, Nick. Ewan.
So, to outline what a community river charity does and can do, I'm going to start with a minor bit of geography, then go into the most local and then micro quickly. So, the River Brue starts at Alfred's Tower, which is just up there on the Stour Head estate. Just about 250 metres up, drops very quickly 5 miles into Bruton. We might come back to that. Through Glastonbury out to the river, like the River Severn, Bristol Channel at Highbridge. So quite an important Somerset River catchment. We are founded to restore the natural balance of that river. Personally, I grew up on a different river in Somerset. I grew up on the River Cam in West Camel, which is only slightly further over there. Spent a lot of time, like our garden, the house was called Otter's Court. We spent a lot of time in the river because you could get straight in the river. By the time, like building little weirs and things, by the time I was a teenager, my mates and I would walk from West Camel to Queen Camel, like 2 miles in the river, just to keep cool on a summer's day, because it was quite a good thing to do. So people just like mucking about in rivers. What we can do as a community group is, back in 2010, when at the start of the coalition government, they very quickly cut the Environment Agency's funding by 50%. People might complain about the Environment Agency not monitoring things, but at that point they stopped monitoring rivers for water quality. The only way that we can work out if our rivers are healthy is for the community groups to do it themselves, ourselves, through what we call citizen science. The way we do that is, you probably have heard that there are wild trout at the top of the food chain in the river. They're not the top of the food chain, the otters are the top of the food chain. But at the bottom of the food chain, the wild trout and other fish need to eat the invertebrates to survive. So what we do is we get in the river, we do a thing called kick sampling, which has a special net. We kick the gravel 6 times 30 seconds. We get the stuff out and we count all of these amazing mayfly larvae, olives, cranefly, like look at them, and through the count of like number of species and number of larvae, you can tell how healthy your river is at that point in time. And we do it every month. We get a baseline through the Anglers Riverflow Monitoring Initiative, and that is registered so that the Environment Agency actually will take action if we go beneath the regular level that we get on our site. So we might come back to why we might drop beneath that level, but it's a pollution incident.
Thanks
and
very
that's
much.
what we're doing.
Thanks, Ewan. Really fascinating from all the panellists. Thanks, guys. And Tim Smedley, like we obviously, as British folk, we focus on the UK and now the problems that we're having. Are we alone in the world in having difficulty managing our water systems right now?
No, definitely not. We might be close to being alone in the world by just chucking our sewage out when we've got regulation to fix it. So internationally, 80% of wastewater does go out untreated. It's not uncommon. But when you've got a regulator and a legal statute saying you can't do that, that's pretty unusual. In terms of water scarcity, that's where I started from with the book. And I went to a few different countries to see what they're dealing with. Probably, although I went to Jordan, I went to Ghana, both have acute water problems. Probably the scariest I went to was Western US, though. So California, Arizona, and Nevada are the three states that share Lake Mead, which is the largest reservoir in the US, behind the Hoover Dam. But Lake Mead is falling over 4 meters year on year and has been for the last 20 years. That's only going in one direction. They're set to run out of water in terms of the levels needed to go through the dam, through the hydroelectric turbines. That's set to run out by 2029, so within this decade. And 40 million people rely on that water. So there are acute water problems in many parts of the world, including some advanced, very rich societies such as California.
What are they doing in the States? Are they as concerned or ostensibly as concerned as we are here?
It's interesting. Yes and no, but it depends very much on which state you're in. So in Nevada with Las Vegas, they were initially not given so much allocation from Lake Mead, so they always had to grow up with water scarcity. I joined a ride-along with wastewater investigators in Las Vegas, which they drive around in cop-style cars and fine people for any water misuse. So if you wash your car and if the water goes off your property onto a pavement, you'll be fined. You'll be fined $80. So they take it really seriously there. Whereas down in Arizona, who got a much bigger allocation, wash your car however you like. They've filled up town lakes. They flood their back gardens for lovely citrus gardens. So it's really interesting, the differences in water use. And in general, no, I didn't get the sense that they were prepared for the scarcity to come, especially in Arizona.
Interesting. Brontie, we've heard about sort of evidence-based and citizen science, and obviously fascinating the work that Ewan's doing. In terms of sort of understanding data in order around accountability and holding government or in our case, the sort of poster boy, bad boys, the water companies, but how important is that data that's being gathered by individual citizens in order to understand the extent of the problem and then act on it?
Yeah, so I think Ewan might want to comment on this as well. I mean, it's absolutely vital. We've never seen the Environment Agency defunded in this way to this extent. I think in probably even in our grandparents' generation, there was, the UK has always been quite a regulated society, and especially post joining the European Union. We won't go to the leaving of the European Union today, but joining of the European Union and kind of managing our beaches and our rivers. We have just seen this steady decline in the last 10 years of any government intervention and any monitoring. So, I mean, as I say, I think Ewan will attest to it, that it's the only thing being done, really, isn't it? I mean, it's just starting to become an election issue. So I think that probably the government will start to give more funding to data collection on an institutional level. But if you are interested in joining a river group and helping with data collection, I'd say probably it's one of the most important things you can do as a citizen. I mean, short of marching on a on a water company's office and taking them a jar of your disgusting river water full of poo, which one of my colleagues really wants to do. I don't know what else we do really.
Shall I add to
idea.
that?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So the thing I wanted to add, so I want to speak up for slurry, actually, because there is a lot of coverage now in the media, which is a good thing, about sewage treatment. And yes, it's a problem in towns. If we're talking about pollution in like incidents in our rivers, the Brue, etc., our bigger problem is actually intensive dairy farming. And it is then the slurry coming out of the sheds of the cows who never go out and see daylight in the winter being spread on the fields and then washed straight into the river. And the thing that kills the river fly when we see a pollution incident, it's generally that rather than chemicals, just because we're fortunate to live in a rural area that doesn't have that many houses upstream of it. And then if you extend that further, we've got a problem in the Somerset levels at the moment that you may have heard with our phosphate levels, that phosphates are they're not very soluble, and once they're into the vegetation and the soil, they don't come out very quickly. Our wetland sites have violated it's Ramsar, which is a place in Hungary, the Ramsar level on phosphates, and they talk about sources of that pollution as point source or diffuse source. Point source is water treatment coming out of sewage treatment. Diffuse source is slurry going onto fields. It's shit coming one way or the other way. It has, because actually the water companies have improved their act a bit, it's the slurry source that is now about 2/3 of the problem, according to the data. So here, now you've got to. I'd love to see more coverage of the slurry problem.
It's the same on the Wye too. So on the River Wye, it's not livestock slurry; it's chicken slurry essentially. There's over 1,000 intensive chicken farming sheds on the Wye catchment, and that's causing, I think, 90% of the phosphorus pollution in the Wye. But the Wye used to be full of water crowfoot. It used to be a lovely, lush river, but 90% of that water crowfoot has died now. So lots of the Wye is at risk of dying out because of chicken farming in that catchment. Although I would add, you're right, we do need way more coverage on that. But the unique thing about sewage pollution from the wastewater companies is it's every river.
Yeah.
Every single river. So there's an amazing website run by the Rivers Trust called Is My River Fit to Play In or Swim In? I can't remember if it's a play in. And you can zoom in and see your local river and see where the sewage outflow pipes are and how many hours those sewage outflow pipes have spilled for. And it is every river. That's the scary thing about it.
Nick Measham, you talked about being an evidence-led organisation at Wildfish. I mean, what evidence are you seeing from this data that's coming in, that's more available to us through largely through citizen science? What are you seeing in the rivers as a fisherman yourself?
Right. Well, it's a lot of deterioration, basically. We also have a activity called Smart Rivers, which is citizen science led and collects evidence and analyses the little bugs to unlock slightly more information than Riverfly. But both of these things are absolutely critical because, as Ewan has pointed out, there is, to a first approximation, no monitoring taking place. The evidence we're seeing, cutting the chase, one example was below on a tributary of the headwaters of the River Itchen, which is one of our most highly protected chalk streams in the country over in Hampshire. There was a salad washing plant, and this salad washing plant washed off chemicals that salads were brought in from all over Europe and heavily laced with various pesticides. Washing them into the river was dead. So we did some invertebrate sampling. There were virtually no insects in that sample. As a result of that evidence, we were then able to encourage the Environment Agency to do something about it. That salad plant has now closed and has gone. There are now some planning issues about use of the lands. There's always something, but the pollution of the river has declined as a result of that. And it's elsewhere we see agricultural pollution. And again, we absolutely agree with, in terms of the data we get, that phosphates are a big problem. Increasingly, pesticides, chemicals are coming out. We've done sampling on rivers in Norfolk, and that's a huge problem there on the Wensum. But it's everywhere. And I don't want you to go away thinking that the only thing we care about is sewage pollution. We care passionately about agriculture as well, and it is a very, very big problem. And one main read across, we hope, from the law case that we're taking, is it will encourage and impel the government to also enforce the legislation around agricultural pollution too, which is another critical component. We need all of these things done. And we've got the evidence tells us of what the problem is. We do need to carry out that vital monitoring all the time to have that body of evidence. But ultimately, we need together to put pressure on our government to resource the agencies, the Environment Agency, properly to carry out its job. That's what I feel.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Brontie, I mean, in terms of...
I was just going to literally add
yeah.
to that in terms of this accountability issue is I'm not really one to sit here and say, you know, individual action and all of this, recycle your plastic bottles and we're going to save the world. I don't think that that's the first thing we should be talking about. But I do think what you've just heard there is it's not just about going and volunteering in your local river and collecting insect samples. It's also about saying, should we really be eating chicken? And, you know, should we be eating so much dairy? And I think this is a really good example of saying we have our own level of accountability as well as these big water companies. And we know from the statistics that one of the most important things we can do is eat less meat and eat less dairy. And that discussion just then shows exactly why. You know, if we all cut that right back, you wouldn't need that many chicken plants. You wouldn't need that many dairy farms washing into the river. So I think there's kind of a discussion to be had about joined up thinking and not just going, I'm going to do this one thing, but all of us coming together and joining up with our thinking. That was what I was going to add to that.
That's a really good point. Thank you. And in terms of that act of holding government and big organisations to account, I mean, can you describe some of the work that you guys are doing at Lawyers for Nature in terms of specifically around rivers and water quality?
Yeah, so I think it's just worth taking a step back from the government for a second. So the reason why we're quite passionate and quite driven into a rights of nature approach is because what generally happens in law is, in most jurisdictions, and ours is the jurisdiction that's exported our legal system all over the world, as we know, is you kind of have a two-track system. You have a civil private track and you have a criminal track. And the criminal track is managed by the state. And therefore, if you've got either a private citizen or a corporate, such as a water company, committing criminal offences, you are almost entirely reliant on your government to take action through its prosecuting authorities to take that corporate or the directors of that corporate to a criminal court and say, you have broken the criminal law and somebody needs to go to prison or somebody needs to pay a fine. And that's really, really time consuming. And the criminal law is often a really big, blunt instrument in that respect. And essentially, you know, you cut the head off a monster and another one just grows through, right? So you send one director to court for one water company. Okay, the rest of them just carry on, or a new director crops up and a new policy, but it's ultimately still the same thing. So the lesson there is the criminal law is a blunt object, but worse than that, if you go to the end of the criminal system and you do fine a water company, and we saw this with Southern Water, was fined £90 million, you have to then ask the question, okay, so where does that money go? How quickly is it paid, for one thing? So is it paid on an instalment basis? And where does that money go? Well, criminal fines go straight back into the government coffers, and then the government of the day decides where they spend that money. There is absolutely no obligation on our government to spend that £90 million restoring the waters in the Southern Water Territory. They could spend it on the Met Police if they want to. So the criminal law is really, really problematic. So then we move to the civil law. Now, the civil law is at the moment, for this particular issue, probably not fit for purpose. Because how do you say, I am a farmer or I am a resident who lives on the banks of a river, and this one bit of pollution that flows through here really upset me, it caused land damage or whatever. How do you say that? Who do you say it to? You know, how do we trace that one bit of pollution from upstream? Who do we hold to account, and under what particular type of law? There's no contractual nexus. So you didn't sign a contract as that landowner with the person that polluted 5 miles up the river. There's no contractual nexus there where you can say, well, that's a breach of contract. Okay, then. So then we move to the sort of the torts of negligence or nuisance. And we say, well, you 5 miles up the river caused me a problem down here when you polluted. Can we do that? And that's got its own problems without kind of going too deep into it. That's got its real problems with holding those people to account, with the distance, the remoteness in law, as well as physicality and things like that. And blame, of course, as well, because they could just turn around and say that was a total accident, or that's commercial farming for you and that's how that works, whatever. So one of the things that we're exploring this year with a group of academics, campaigners, all kinds of different civil society actors is whether we actually need to move towards a situation where the river itself has a right to take litigation in its own name. And that would be the way companies do, of course. If any of you run a company, you will know that if someone damages your reputation, if someone breaks a contract with you, if someone causes a problem for your company in terms of a nuisance, the company will take action in court and it will be in the company's name. The company will be awarded that compensation and the company, and this is the most vital thing, the company will decide how to spend that money, those damages that you receive. And so the question is, why can't we do that for rivers? Why can't the river be an entity in its own right? Why can't it have legal personhood? Why can't it go to court and have a voice in court and say, this is how I was damaged, this is how much it's going to cost to repair me, and I would like that much money, please, and I will then choose how I spend it. So
Thanks,
that's
Brontie.
our work.
Thank you. Fascinating. Tim Smedley, you staying on the kind of legal subject, if you may, you said obviously we're not alone in having problems in terms of we haven't invested enough in our storage of water. We're not alone in having problems managing our water, but it is unique, we are unique in the UK in terms of having the legislation in place but not acting on it when it comes to things like sewage pollution. I mean, can you give a bit of context to that from your experience travelling around the globe? Where are the countries that are doing this really well and actually have clean water systems?
Yeah, it's a good question. It comes up a lot. And very few countries do it really well. A few thoughts come to mind. One, just what I was thinking when you were speaking, the Southern Water £90 million fine. I followed up in their company accounts and their profits were still up on the previous year. So pollution pays. Get even when they're getting fined. So if you can get away without cleaning your sewage and just chucking it into a river for free, you do, it seems. Internationally, so one thing we haven't touched on yet, and maybe we're getting to, is abstraction. So pollution is one thing. Pollution is a bit like being, I don't know, force-fed poisonous food and it's slowly killing you. Abstraction is strangling your arteries, cutting off your life source. I've been to visit some chalk streams in the east of England, similar time of year in the summer a couple of years ago, where the beds are just dry. And these were chalk streams that had or used to have water mills on them. So factories used to rely on that water all year round. No one's building a water mill on a seasonal river, although the water companies there have tried to claim that these, of course, they always dried out in the summer. No, they don't. We know that. We have records showing that. So over-abstraction is a serious issue the world over. I mean, I mentioned Western US. In terms of kind of the legal rights issue, there is one shining beacon of hope internationally, and that's the Vjosa River in Albania. The Vjosa River is the only remaining free-flowing long river in Europe. All other rivers have weirs or dams at some point along them. Vjosa was going to have 2 dams built. There was a long campaign which included Patagonia. I think Leonardo DiCaprio was in there for a bit. To get it a legal status of a national park. So the first ever river has been recognised as a national park. And that finally happened last year. So the Vjosa River will be kept dam-free and weir-free. And there's now an EU law, I suppose, but certainly a target of 25,000 kilometres of free-flowing river in the EU. So that's dam removal, weir removal. But it also will move towards lowering abstraction rates because sucking up the groundwater sucks up the sources of rivers. And we see that internationally. We're seeing it a hell of a lot here.
Thanks, Tim. Ewan Jones, abstraction, is that a major issue around here as well?
Of course it's a major issue. And I'll start with actually an example which starts with a really good example and then maybe explains the problem. Like, on the edge of the Forest of Selwyn area, and I'll come back to what that is at some point, just the other side of Bruton, on the Brue, we have a large family cheesemaker called White Farms. They are exemplars in many ways. They are more than 100% green, because if you talk to Rich and Tom Clothier, the farmers behind it, they'd say they had an epiphany, like in the early 2010s, where they decided, got all of this space and we need all this energy. Why don't we start farming for energy? And now slurry there's not a problem because it goes into their biodigester and their farm scale bioenergy. They use that energy to power their cheese plant. They're more than 100% green, as in electrical green. Brilliant.
Yep.
We've got other farmers in the area who are going down the regenerative agriculture, as we heard on Friday afternoon, rewilding thing, farming for nature. What we haven't got is farming for water. Because actually what they told me back in 2015, the first time I went to see their energy plant, was, well, we think we've cracked energy and we're more than 100% energy efficient. We can see a summer coming, because basically no one sees climate change before farmers do, where there's going to be no rain all summer. There's been a few of those recently. All of the farmers in this area are taking water out with boreholes. It's not just the farmers. We're sitting on the green sand here, which slopes east into Hampshire. There's a huge pipe that was put in about 15 years ago, I think Wessex Water, through the Deverils, taking water, sucking it out of the green sand off to Salisbury and Southampton. So it's one of those issues of commons. No one has worked out how to cut their water usage on the farms, and everyone is taking the water at a rate it's not sustainable. It's the definition of not sustainable. You can't keep taking water out of the aquifers at the level because the boreholes on the end of it are running dry.
Thanks, Ewan. Very much appreciate we're moving from subject to subject through here, and it's a fascinating discussion, and yet another Planted Unearthed conversation I feel could run for hours here, but I really do want to get the audience involved at some point as well. Could I just ask you, Nick, one question, just as a fisherman, and this is coming from a dad and a nature lover myself. We live in a place called the area of the Nadder Valley, and I spoke to you about this when I came and met with you down by which river we were along near Salisbury a few weeks ago, but the Avon. But I'm by the Nadder, and when we moved to the area about 5-6 years ago, I had sort of slightly romantic visions of taking my family along the river and exploring these beautiful chalk streams that are there. But it was only really once I moved there that I realised we couldn't actually get onto them because they were mostly private, and I've not really been able to show my daughter too much of the rip chalk streams. Is there a recognition that from anglers, or a shift perhaps in mindset around access, and in order to enable this citizen science to take place, that we're going to have to let people actually onto the rivers a bit more? Is that a fair comment, or
it's a more than fair comment, actually, and it is something that we are at Wildfish very, very, very kind of focused on. Because how did I end up doing this? Well, I ended up doing this to full circuit as a kid. I used to love playing in streams and rivers, playing with water, just having access to streams. I grew up in the industrial West Midlands, and there wasn't that much clean water, but there was some. And parents then buy me a fishing rod, I discover fishing, fantastic. Now back full circle, wanted to open up these rivers and make sure that younger generations, indeed anybody, can have access to them. And yes, I mean, I think rivers are there to be used for a number of different purposes. Traditionally, the fishermen hate the idea of other people disturbing their bucolic peace, disturbing the fish, and so on. The evidence is the fish actually care more about the fact that they've got clean water and plenty of it. They don't care that much about the disturbance. And within a few minutes of someone having swam through a section of river, the fish will be back feeding, doing what they're doing. And I fervently believe that we have to fix this access problem. I mean, the south of England, our chalk streams are heavily populated. They're very, very fragile ecosystems. They're extremely rare. I mean, there's less than 200 of them in the entire world, most of them in the UK. So they're rarer than rhinos, these things, believe it or not. And we have a lot of them. But most people don't know that. They're heavily, in the jargon, preserved. So that means that access is strictly limited. It has to change, because how can we get the wider public to take responsibility for these rivers? We can give them, which I think is a brilliant idea, giving them a legal personality. we have to do everything we can. But part of that is, I mean, how many people here actually fish? Well, sadly a minority. Most of you are old like me, which is disappointing. So if we're going to solve these problems, we need all of you to feel part of it. And if you're excluded, by definition, you can't feel part of it. So although I'm a passionate fisherman and I love fishing, I want that fishing to continue. And the only way that it is going to continue, realistically, is by cracking the access issue, so you and your children can be part of it. And I think a lot of landowners now, riparian owners, are getting aware of that problem. So it's a big issue.
Thanks, Nick. Well, guys, I mean, just absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for your contribution so far. I'm going to give you guys something to think about just before I put it to the audience. Just to, at the end, I'd just like you, as I mentioned at the top of the conversation, just to be able to give everyone something to take home with them, a tool in their armoury to help with this situation, whatever it may be. So if I could put it out to the audience, I'm going to give you my microphone. If there are any questions out there to the panel, you'd be more than welcome.
Razor brolly.
Razor brolly, exactly. There's a brolly.
There's one.
Rachel, could I possibly ask you to take my microphone? Or indeed, if you could just shout out the question. Let's see if we can make that work, and then if not, we'll see if we can hear.
That biodigesters perhaps could be some solution to the pollution. Muck is money, and I feel we're not using that. And do you think biodigesters could be part of the solution?
Did anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, yes, I certainly do think that they can be part of the solution. They also need to be managed, because the digestate, that you do end up with stuff, but as long as that is disposed of in a controlled and sensible fashion, they can be a big part of the problem. And I think you.
Yeah, I think they are a huge. It's basically all they are big compost heaps, and what you get out in terms of digestate is far less of a problem than the amount of slurry, like pig manure, whatever, that went into them. So yeah, they're an excellent thing, and you can use that digestate as fertilizer.
They're also used in large sewage treatment works, so you will get biodigester plants in large sewage treatment works, and they produce energy on site, and then it becomes fertilizer that farmers can use. Farmers have mixed opinions on it, though. It's really good for nitrogen and phosphorus. It's a good fertilizer, but we don't really treat in a high enough standard in this country for things such as pharmaceutical waste, that comes out of our urine. Many of us are on different medications. A lot of that ends up going through the sewage system untreated. So some of it will come out in the sewage process, some doesn't. You end up with microplastics in that too. So some farmers don't like to use it. It's fairly cheap stuff. It is good fertilizer, but there's questions about what's in it too.
Yeah. Hello. You spoke about the slurry from dairy produce, which I thought was quite interesting. I wasn't aware of that. Now, we have labelling on our food products about, things that could potentially endanger our health, like the fat content and the sugar content. I mean, surely the slurry content in our rivers is also damaging our health. So would there be any argument for putting that on the label as well, to deter companies from causing the problem in the first place?
Yeah, I can start with that one if you like. I think it's a really, really good point, and I think labelling is one thing we can do. We know that when we put something like a piece of legislation in place that says you must do these things, generally speaking, companies sort of do them, but they kind of find a way to package it up so they can. It becomes permissive in some ways. So it's like, well, we're doing this thing, and this is how much. And we saw that with sugar and salt. Coca-Cola is still making Coke. People are still drinking Coke, right? But you will be able to see that it's really, really bad for your health. So in some ways, labelling can just legitimise what's going on. But it does allow people to make better choices. And I think there's definitely something in what you're saying. I think a really good example of this is the company Oatly, and what they've done. They obviously aren't looking at slurry figures, and maybe that's something they will do in the future based on what you've said. It might be worth writing to them. But what they do is they do put their genuine carbon footprint on their oat milk, and I think they used to compare it to dairy milk, so you used to be able to see, but I don't think they're allowed to do that anymore. But that you can actually see right through to their Scope 3 emissions of exactly how much carbon footprint that oat milk litre is costing. And so, I think it is interesting, but it's got to be done with for the right reasons by the people that really want that information out there. And it can't just be done as a legitimising thing of, well, there's that on the packet now, so just crack on and carry on buying it.
No, I mean, it was just sort of furthering to the point that there's legislation in place that the government's not following clearly, so that's not effective. So if people are aware, and not just all of us, we're likely to teach you to convert it. Like just your average bod that's walking around in the supermarket is aware of the amount of pollution that product is causing to the river, then maybe from their choice they will decide to buy a different product. And then, if those companies then see their profits going down, then they may follow suit.
Sorry, for those at the back, they're just talking about essentially accountability, really, and informed choice for consumers, really, so that they know exactly what's going into the product. But has anyone else got any other comments on that?
Well, I was going to sort of take it from both ways, just quickly. So there's one. I'm always cautious of putting it onto the consumer and saying it's the consumer's fault for this happening. We do know that the interventions that work at the consumer end are generally very simple. They're either nudge or regulatory. So 5p on carrier bags, people stop buying carrier bags and bring their own bags. That works. Like stopping lead in petrol, stopping smoking in public spaces, they do work overnight and they lead to behaviour changes. But food labelling is a very complicated thing. And so it's part of the general be aware more of what we're eating, eat less, better quality meat in the shift towards a plant-based diet rather than banning meat overnight. Because if we look at where the problem of this slurry is coming from, these cows that live indoors all of their lives or all of the winter, all they are producing is low-quality milk. The milk that they produce is actually not of a high enough fat content to produce cheese. So it's more at the regulatory end of what are we incentivising farmers to produce, because you're probably growing a whole load of feed and you're incentivising them to feed the cows with that. So it's taking up a lot of land that we could be growing better plant-based stuff on if we structured the agricultural incentives a different way, because that's what the farmers would respond to.
Thanks, Ewan. Time for a couple more questions. I'll go to the lady down here first, and then David, and then the gentleman in the house. So three more. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you very much. As well as rivers being given legal status, would there be a case for, say, the chalk streams being given national park status? Considering how endangered they are.
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly, and then I think you'll have more specific points to make. But yeah, I think there is a case for that. The chalk streams, certainly in the east of England, are all part of the same aquifer, the same chalk aquifer. So there's often talk from water companies of, okay, we're going to spend X amount on this river because there's a big campaign there. There's a particularly good campaign on the River Lark, for example, so the Lark's getting some money, and they're reducing some abstraction near the Lark. But you can't just pick and choose like that, because all of the chalk streams are coming from the same aquifer. So yes, some sort of recognition for the chalk aquifer, I think, could work. There's one wonderful campaign run by Charles Rangeley Wilson called Chalk Streams First. Now, this isn't about legal recognition per se, but it's just about a different approach we could be adopting, which is simply stop all the boreholes, let the rivers run once again, and then collect downstream. So all the rivers will flow again, back to their normal rate, go downstream, and then, maybe have a reservoir downstream or a pump system from Affinity Water going up, which they are building as part of their network anyway. So we could just completely change our approach to how we abstract water rather than just sucking it all out locally, treat it as one big system and work that way.
Thanks, Tim. Brontie?
I can jump in. Did you want to go next? Or?
Well, I just wanted to talk about the Chalk Stream First project, which is okay as far as it goes, but I'm actually opposed to them taking the water out lower down, build a reservoir and save the river. That's my stance on it. So it's part of the answer, in my view.
I think just to round that question off, what's worth just noting is there's quite a gulf between something like legal personhood for a river or a chalk stream and designating a site as a triple SI site, and then how that affects planning. And I think there's probably something to be said about bringing those two together. So at the moment, we have a system in the UK where we have planning authority, we have planning inspectors, we have planning rules and heavy regulation. But ultimately, if you push hard enough on a door and you want a housing development as a local council, or you're being told by Central, you have got to build this many houses, those houses will get built and they will need water supply. They will need, concrete and all the rest of it, right? And even if you designate a chalk stream as a triple SI or as a special habitat, special area of habitat, whatever you're going to do within the planning system, if they want to ride roughshod over that for housing targets, they will, right? And this is the problem. And even to the extent of, they're like, we're going to stay within, we'll do with 500 metres of a triple SI or something. Well, animals don't care about 500 metres. Insects don't care about 500 metres. You're still going to damage that habitat. But you need those housing numbers, so you just build. Versus legal personhood of actually giving a river or a chalk stream its rights in the legal system to say, I am being damaged and I'm going to sue for that and get reparations. And I think those two things need to come together and everything needs to be strengthened. Thanks,
Brontie. Time for two very quick questions. I would also ask for the responses just to be as brief as possible. Thank you, guys.
We could talk all day.
Sorry.
Both at the same time.
Thank you. And thank you very much for a very good talk. Mine's not so much a question. I'd really just like to pick up on the point that Nick made. We've heard this afternoon how much systemic these problems are and needs government intervention to start to put things to work. But I think I'd just like to support Nick's point that there's a lot of legislation that's already in place that needs to be taken forward. Could I just appeal for everybody here this afternoon to write to their MP and ask why these measures are not being enforced?
Point, yeah.
Can I also say there's a general election coming up, so you might want to look at your MP's voting record around pollution, rivers and nature restoration and suggest whether you want to carry on voting for them.
Yeah, just a quick one. Surface water runoff is a big excuse used by water companies to pump wastewater and sewage into the rivers and into the seas. We can all do our bit to help with that, with soakaways, and they're talking about water butts with soakaways. Again, do you feel it's something that needs more strength in legislation when new houses are built, that they are built in such a way that surface water doesn't go straight into the drainage system, it soaks into the ground?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I think there are some rules on SUDs, so sustainable urban drainage systems, which are normally swales for new builds. But yeah, it's not standardised. It's not standard practice. It should be. I also think it should be standard practice for new builds to include rainwater harvesting tanks of a substantial size. There's plenty of countries in Europe that do that. Belgium and parts of Germany require you to have rainwater harvesting tanks. And those are plumbed in, by the way. They're plumbed into your toilets and washing machine. That massively reduces water use. Water companies could easily do that. There's a lot of talk from water companies about reducing personal water use. Rainwater is there. But they don't like decentralised solutions. They like the big centralised approach that they can engineer.
Thanks, Tim. Great answer. And I guess in many ways that's one of the things that we could be doing ourselves. So thank you all to the audience for those fantastic questions. Great to see such engagement from you guys in what is such an important issue, obviously. But as I said at the beginning, I would just like to give everyone something to go away with the expertise that all of you guys have got on the panel. Can you just give one maybe simple thing that we could all be doing as soon as we get home today to improve the situation?
Okay, one's really difficult, but essentially the solutions all come down to capturing this stuff, capturing rainwater. So personally, we can install a water butt to water our gardens with. If you've already got one, install a second one. But then on a wider scale, I didn't get much time to talk about farming practices, but regenerative farming, cover crop farming, no-till farming make a huge difference to the amount of water that drains down into the aquifers below. So supporting those kind of practices and supporting your local river campaigns, such as we've heard of today.
And in simple terms, that's just because if this grass beneath us was bare, it would just hit and run off if you've got long extended periods of drought. So it just goes into the rivers faster. And, anything that's inputted on top, fertiliser runs off quickly and poisons.
Exactly that. And conventionally ploughed farming tends to lead to a hard cap surface. So kind of crumbly soil on top of a hard cap because of all the heavy machinery. So that water just runs off.
Thanks, Tim. Brontie?
Again, it's really hard to do one. I'm going to say make good choices. And by that, I mean make good food choices, which I've already mentioned. So the cheese manufacturer, for me, that would be an excellent choice.
White Farms.
Yeah, and I'm sure you can find out that name if you didn't hear it. But make good choices and lend your support to people that are the helpers of the world, because there's plenty of us doing things, and whether it's legal interventions or whether it's a cheese manufacturer or whether it's someone writing a book trying to educate you on what's happening here, lend your support to them, because we desperately need everybody to come together with joined up solutions and joined up thinking.
Thanks, Brontie. Nick Measham.
Just echo what Brontie said. Yeah, get involved, support the work that we're doing as organisations. So sign up for Brue Crew, go onto our website and give us your support. It doesn't cost you anything. It's great if you do want to contribute financially, but what we really need is support, because the more support we have, the greater the voice we all have.
Thanks, Nick.
The better the outcome.
Yeah, so one idea, working on the assumption that most of the people here don't own a farm or have a river, like riparian rights to a river beside them. And I was actually thinking this before the last question, which was perfect, was yellowfish. Take this home. There's a project that you can do very simply, which is to get the message out that a lot of drains just drain straight into the rivers, is get some road marking yellow paint, spray a stencil of a yellow fish on the drain, put the message around saying, yellow fish, no rain down the drain. And all of your local river groups should be doing a yellow fish project to basically stop pouring, like washing up liquid, car washing stuff. I've seen paint poured down drains. Yeah, it should only be rainwater going down those drains.
I would like to think we're already educated enough around this audience to not be pouring paint down drains.
But yellow fish help you tell everyone else not to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's great points. Like really good, guys. Thank you so much. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm going to put my one thing you could all be doing to improve the situation, and that is buy Tim Smedley's brilliant book, The Last Drop, which I can tell you, for one, I've read. I haven't had a lot of time in the build up to this event, it's fair to say, but I have read Tim's book, and it is absolutely fantastic, a really important piece of work. So Tim, please do go and meet Tim in the Fold Bookshop afterwards, where he'll be doing a book signing, and you'll actually be able to get the very first print run of The Last Drop. So please go and buy Tim's book after this talk. But to all my panellists, genuinely, absolutely fascinating, such an important subject, and hugely grateful to all of you in the audience also for enduring this first rain that we've had for several weeks. So thank you to all. That just leaves me to thank our brilliant panellists again, thanking our sponsor of this talk, PYTCH. Thanks also to the National Trust for hosting us here at Stourhead, our AV production team, who along with SolCell have enabled this Planted Unearthed talk programme to be powered entirely by renewable energy. If you enjoyed this talk, please visit our website, planted-community.co.uk, for information about renting our beautiful off-grid cabin behind us, as well as more great articles, interviews and features, and information about Planted's environmentally focused commercial partners. Thanks to everyone here for watching. My name's Sam Peters, and this has been Muddying the Waters.
Thank you.